Welcome to E Squared Emporium for all things AP Psychology. Today we are beginning the cognitive unit. We are looking at 2.1a and B. This is the perception section, module 2.1a. So perception is the process of creating patterns from our raw senses. So how do we make patterns out of what our senses are telling us? And in our last chapter, we were talking all about the senses from our eyes and our taste and our skin and our hearing. Well, now we have to make sense of it. We have to make meaningful patterns. So there's top-down processing, basically coming from the brain or our thoughts down to our senses. So using all of the experiences we've ever had, we have to interpret the sensations that we are receiving. Our senses are constantly sending us new information, hundreds of thousands of sounds and smells and tastes, all happening at once every second. And we can get totally overwhelmed if we don't let our thoughts kind of make sense of all of that. So, top down processing helps us simplify our understanding of the world. It allows us to make sense of the information very quickly. We navigate the world more effectively. We can see patterns really quickly. We make decisions much quicker. And your initial impressions are usually based on previous experiences, and they will influence how you interpret the details. So, whatever your senses are bringing to you, top down processing says the brain and the thoughts are going to be the ones that interpret all of that. So, some examples when you listen to a sentence, you can probably go ahead and fill in the rest of what a person's about to say. You kind of know where it's going. You're already trying to fill in the blanks. You're already trying to identify the words. When you see a tree branch, even if it's partially covered, well, you know what a tree looks like and you know what a branch looks like. So even if it's covered, you can kind of figure out what your senses are sending you. When we're reading, we use context clues. That's an example of top down. When you're playing a video game and you already know where the buttons on your controller are and you know what they do, that's an example of top down. So bottom up is simply the opposite. Now we're taking information up from the senses and it's going up from the senses up into the brain where it is then going to be interpreted. So for example, you put your hand on a hot stove and the senses are saying, that is hot, your skin is burning, and you need to move your hand. So bottom up processing takes that sensory information and then assembles it and integrates it and brings it up. And then your brain says, why don't we move our hand? So selective attention is like shining a flashlight on only one thing at a time. We can only focus our awareness on a limited aspect of what we are experiencing. We screen out the stimuli that we don't want to deal with. It's threatening, or it causes us anxiety, or we don't think it's very important. So we're only putting our flashlight on the one thing we want to give our attention to. And we often think that we're really great at multitasking, but multitasking is actually a myth. We have very selective attention. So right now, if you're trying to check your text messages, you're trying to answer your AP Physics homework, and you think you're watching this video, you're really not doing any of those three things very well at all. Your consciousness can only focus on one task at a time. None of us are great at multitasking. Our attention switches 120 times during a 30-minute block if we're trying to do two things at once. It's 120 switches that we're doing. So we're really doing 50% of everything very poorly and not getting anything done really well. This is what it looks like, all this sensory information all coming into us at once. And we can only attend to one or two things. So only one or two things gets to come all the way out of our filter. Our senses take in 11 million bits of information per second. You're not aware of it. Most of it goes into your unconscious. We're only consciously processing 40 bits per second. That could be the temperature of the room. Is the air conditioner on? Is there a cologne or perfume somebody is wearing? What's the lighting like? Is my chair hard? Are my friends there? Do I like the music I'm listening to? Up to 40 bits. That's it. After that, everything is unconsciously processed. So we can only give a selective attention to 40 bits per second. So let's talk about texting, talking, and driving. Last month, 60% of Americans read or sent a text while driving. And even a hands free conversation while driving, you only have 37% of your attention on actually driving. So this can have tragic consequences. We see 4 times more accidents, as much as drunk driving. The cocktail party effect is another example of this. Think of yourself at a party and you have to focus on the person who's talking to you and they're going blah, 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 and your mind is kind of wandering. You're not really focusing. But what if somebody says your name in the far corner, or they talk about a college you want to go to, or they say something that all of a sudden grabs your attention, and your attention instantly can focus in on them? They could be at the farthest side of the room, and that's where you focus. So somebody could be saying exactly, and your name is Zach. And when they say exactly, you're like, what? Who? Who said my name? So the cocktail party effect is how we can kind of tune out everybody except a person who is saying something that we want to focus on, even if that person is far, far away in the party. Inattentional blindness is failing to see visible objects when our attention is directed somewhere else. So we're blind to everything else around us. So let's look at this young lady. She's got her music on and she is doing something on her computer. If somebody were to sneak up behind her, would she even notice? She would not. She probably wouldn't hear any other sounds around her. She would not hear somebody else sneaking up on her. So she has inattentional blindness. And so does this young lady. She's in the middle of a crowded street listening to her music. Her eyes are closed. She would have no idea if a car horn was blaring or a bike was about to run her over. She would have no idea. So Ulrich Neisser in 1979 coined the term change blindness, and we're going to look at some of his videos and studies. We are often so intent on our task that we don't even notice a simple change in our environment because we're only focused on the one thing we're trying to do. This is a form of inattentional blindness, but this one's specifically about a change that occurs in the environment and we don't notice it. So we've talked about visual capture. It does come into play again in perception. It's the dominance of our vision over all other senses, and it does help in creating our perception. And it's part of why optical illusions work, and it's part of what happens with selective attention. So perceptual set, also called a mental set, also called a schema. Through all of our experiences, we expect certain results. We have these mental assumptions, and they affect us. It's very top down, and they can alter our perception. So for instance, when you see this optical illusion here, do you see an old lady or do you see a young woman? And it could have to do with your age. The age that you are when you look at this picture will set how you see it. It's part of your mental or perceptual set. Another example, do you see the Loch Ness Monster or do you see a tree branch? Well, it depends on whether you're open to things like Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster. Have you done a lot of studying or researching or reading or watched a lot of, UFO kind of TV shows? You may have a perceptual set or a mental set that says, I believe that there are a lot of things that we haven't discovered yet. But if your perceptual set is that that does not exist and it's scientific only, and you have to show me the proof, and there's no proof that's been found, so it must be a tree branch, then that's going to be your perceptual set. Another example, somebody is saying stuffy nose, stuffy nose. Maybe you're a doctor and you hear stuffy nose, but that's not what the person was saying at all. It's stuff he knows, right? So, but because you were coming from a medical background or a nursing background, you were thinking of somebody who's sick. And so your perceptual set was, oh, they're talking about stuffy noses over there. Nope, that's not what they were talking about at all. Here's another example. A perceptual set can alter our taste perception. So if you were raised in a culture where McDonald's French fries and this very special wrapper, if they were yummy and tasty and something you wanted and looked forward to, you will believe that they actually taste better. So they did a study with students where they served their normal cafeteria, cafe French fries, but they put them in a McDonald's wrapper instead. And the students were like, wow, these taste so much better. They thought they were really from McDonald's just simply because they had a mental set or a perceptual set about the golden arches on the wrapper. But they were just the same old school fries, they were just in a different container. Now, we also see that culture can make a difference. This is where we lay out stereotypes. Your gender can make a difference in your perceptual set. Your age, your income, all of this can alter your perceptions. So, for instance, here's a woman sitting in front of a window if we're in the West. But if you're in a culture where women carry things on their head, people in those cultures actually see this woman carrying a very decorative box on her head and she's just sitting down for a second. They don't see a window. And this other picture, if certain cultures would say, oh, that's inside, and other cultures would see the trees and think it's outside. Now we see the roof there, but from the Western culture, we have a Western bias in our perceptual or mental set. Perceptual adaptation is the brain's ability to adjust its perception of stimuli over time. The best way to talk about this is the perception goggles, which we are all going to have a chance to try on. So, after prolonged exposure to different sensory input, our brains will actually adapt. So, for vision with these perception goggles, it actually takes about 8 days. Now, there are many studies that have been done. Their book talks about them. These were not great studies with animals. They used kittens and monkeys and other animals, and they sewed their eyes closed and did various things to see if they could get their eyes to adapt. And again, they found about 8 days. So humans can actually adapt to an upside down world with the upside down goggles, and animals too. So monkeys and cats and all of the animals that they tested and studied. Perceptual constancy, just see the word constant, right? We want to believe, or we do believe, that shapes remain constant. So doors can be opened or doors can be closed. And even if the door is a slightly different shape, it looks more diamond shaped, and then it looks more rectangle shaped, it looks more trapezoid shape, but we know it's a door. We just know the shape of a door. So that's shape constancy. If you move your table, it could go from square to rectangle back to square again, depending on how you look at it and the angle. But you know it's still your desk and the shape remains constant no matter how we move that desk. Same thing with these lockers, right? All these different locker doors are open and closed, and they have different shading and different shadows and different stuff inside them, but you recognize them as all the same locker doors, even if they're all different shapes the way that they're opened. Motion perception is how we see speed and direction based on our visual cues, based on our vestibular cues, and based on proprioceptive inputs. So we learn about stroboscopic motion. Stroboscopic motion is sort of the way that the early animation movies worked. So a bunch of still pictures presented really, really fast gives us the illusion of moving. So stroboscopic motion would be like if you ever made those little flip books in elementary school, or just any kind of old animation series. That's all stroboscopic motion, kind of Pixar movies. And the five phenomenon is showing up here in this GIF. The lights look like they're blinking in sequence and succession, and it gives you the appearance that the light is moving. But all we're actually doing is just having the colors appear and not appear, and there's actually no movement happening. It's an optical illusion. But this is how our brain can be tricked, again with visual capture, our brain can be tricked into seeing movement where no movement exists. And now we're going to move into 2.1b, which is Gestalt. Let's talk about Gestalt. So Gestalt is a German word. It means the whole or the form. Our brains have a tendency to put together pieces of information into a meaningful whole. We want to make a whole. We want to see patterns. It's how our brain is hardwired. So in Gestalt psychology, we say the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Well, what do we mean by that? Let's take an example. If we look at sodium, that's quite a corrosive metal. And if we look at chlorine, that's a poisonous gas. So we don't like those two things individually. But when we put those two things together, we end up with NaCl, which is salt, which everybody uses salt. So the whole, the salt, is greater than the sum of its parts, the sodium separate and the chlorine separate. And that's what we mean. So when we're looking at a person in therapy with Gestalt, we believe the whole person is greater than the sum of all the parts of that person. And when we're looking at design with Gestalt, the way that our brain sees designs and patterns, the whole of it is greater than the sum of its parts. So how do Gestalt principles help you to see this dog? There's no dog there. It's just a bunch of dots on the page, but you're probably seeing a Dalmatian. And that's because of Gestalt principles that are putting it together. So let's look more at these Gestalt principles. Figure and ground is typically on a white background where we see whatever the writing is or whatever the picture or image is. We see how it stands out against the white background. So writing is the figure and white paper is the ground. But let's look at these. Do you see a face or a vase? And do you see a woman's face or do you see a person playing the saxophone in the second one? Okay, so sometimes you have to go back and forth, looking at the white, looking at the black, looking at the white, looking at the black. Here's another example. Do you see Wolverine or do you see two Batmen? Right, that's another example. So there's 4 Gestalt principles besides figure ground that we need to know. So closure, if there are gaps, our mind will complete it until it's whole. Continuity, we perceive smooth, continuous patterns. Proximity, we like to group nearby things together in our mind. And similarity, we like to put similar things together in our mind. So this is what it looks like. This is the principle of closure. So your brain naturally fills in the gap. Your brain naturally sees a soccer ball. It naturally sees a circle. Your brain is able to fill in all of the gaps here, even though there's no actual lines to finish these images. The law of continuity is where lines are seen as following the smoothest path. Proximity, again, the closer things are together in groupings, we see that they're related to each other. And if we split the group up, we suddenly see 2 groupings. And similarity. In these particular images here, you can see that things that are similar want to be grouped together. All right, and now you are prepared for class, and we will do the rest together.